May 19, 1944, Solomon Sea, north of Bougainville. The afternoon heat sits heavy on the water like a wet blanket. The Pacific looks calm enough to forgive itself, but beneath that polished surface, the ocean is crowded with invisible machinery, steel hulls, batteries, oxygen, sweat, and fear. Men sealed inside a long, narrow tube, listening to the sea for footsteps. Above, a small American destroyer escort pushes through a slow swell, her bow cutting a clean white seam that closes behind her like nothing happened. Her deck vibrates with turbine electric power and the steady certainty of procedure. In the sound hut, headphones clamp tight. Somewhere in that darkness of water, a faint, disciplined rhythm, propeller beats, tries to hide inside the ocean's own noise. On this day, the ship's name is USS England, DE 635, a Buckley-class destroyer escort, about 306 feet long, roughly 1,400 tons standard displacement, built for escort duty and submarine hunting, not for glory. She is not a battleship. She is not a carrier. She is a tiny ship in the language of big fleet war. Yet in the next 12 days, this one escort will become an argument made in explosions, sinking 6 Japanese submarines, a record that remains unequaled. And if you want one recurring symbol to hold this story together, one object to carry the weight of what American industry and democratic logistics looked like in 1944, then let it be the hedgehog. Not the animal, the weapon. A forward-throwing anti-submarine projector that fires a pattern of contact-fused bombs ahead of the ship, bombs that explode only if they hit something. If they miss, they do not detonate. The sea stays quieter. Sonar keeps listening. The hunt continues without losing contact. That matters because in submarine warfare, the side that keeps listening usually wins. By May 1944, Japan's war is no longer about sweeping offensives and triumphant carrier decks. It is about trying to slow an avalanche. The Imperial Japanese Navy is stretched thin, its surface fleet increasingly cautious, its air power bleeding away, and its isolated garrisons, like those on Bougainville, are starving behind Allied lines. Japan's submarines, built in part for fleet scouting and decisive battle doctrine, are being dragged into supply runs and picket line duty. And the Americans, who began the war still learning how to hunt submarines effectively, have turned anti-submarine warfare into a system. Intelligence, radar, sonar, hunter-killer doctrine, aircraft patrols, standardized drills, and mass production. By this stage, the war at sea is increasingly decided not only by gunnery and torpedoes, but by information and industrial repetition. How fast you can build, how well you can coordinate, and how quickly you can learn. The Americans did not just build ships. They built feedback loops. They built a navy that could make mistakes, measure them, and correct them at scale. The British had pioneered tools like Hedgehog earlier in the war, and the Allies learned hard lessons about why conventional depth charges so often failed. Depth charges exploded at preset depths and frequently disrupted sonar contact, turning a precise hunt into a blind brawl. Hedgehog shifted the geometry of that fight, attack while still tracking. Statistically, the difference was dramatic. Thousands of depth charge attacks for relatively few kills versus far fewer hedgehog attacks, producing a far higher success rate. But technology alone does not sink submarines. People do. Operators, commanders, crews who can execute under pressure and who believe in their tools when the sea tries to convince them nothing is there.
Here is what Japanese submarine crews could reasonably expect in 1944. They expected invisibility, especially at night, especially submerged. They expected that even if an escort got close, it might lose contact when it attacked. They expected that the ocean itself would remain their greatest ally: darkness, depth, thermal layers, the immensity of the Pacific. They expected, above all, that a small escort could not stay lucky for long. What they encountered instead was not luck. It was a system. The chain begins with signals intelligence. In mid-May 1944, American codebreakers intercepted and decoded Japanese communications, indicating that the submarine I-16 was departing Truk for a supply mission, carrying rice in rubber bags to Buin, Bougainville. This is where the emotional contrast sharpens. The submarine meant to carry food, rice, survival, to a bypassed garrison becomes the first target in a sequence that will wipe out an entire section of Japan's undersea screen. And the food that matters most in this story is not the rice. It is the American ability to turn metal into weapons, and weapons into repeated, reliable results. On May 18, Escort Division 39, England, George, and Rady sortied from Purvis Bay to intercept I-16. Picture those ships, new Buckley-class escorts, built quickly, purposefully, without romance, tools produced in quantity. In another era, navies chased prestige, bigger guns, bigger hulls. In 1944, the American answer to the submarine threat is pragmatic and industrial. Build the right thing in large numbers and train crews to operate it relentlessly. On the morning of May 19, an Allied aircraft sighted the submarine on the surface north of Bougainville and reported the contact. The escorts formed a line-abreast sonar sweep. At 13:35, England gained sonar contact. From the Japanese side, the world compresses into sound. Distant screws, creeping certainty. Doctrine calls for evasive maneuvers, hard turns, depth changes, attempts to break the attacker's firing solution. It had worked before. But Hedgehog changes what worked even means. With depth charges, the attacker often had to pass over the submarine and drop explosives behind, losing sonar contact. With Hedgehog, the attacker could throw a pattern ahead while still listening. No explosion meant no hit, and no explosion also meant the ocean stayed readable.
Early Hedgehog attacks missed. Then the pattern tightened. On the fifth attack, the weapons struck home. A massive underwater blast followed. I-16 was lost with 107 hands. Pause on that number, 107. It is easy to say submarine sunk and move on, but 107 is a full human inventory: breath, training, memories, families. A submarine does not sink like a ship sinks. It disappears. One moment it is a living machine, the next it is silence. And now the shock begins, not dramatic, but bureaucratic. One loss can be bad luck, two can be misfortune, three becomes doctrinal failure. 6 in 12 days feels like the sea itself has switched sides. The Japanese expected submarines to be predators. By 1944, they are messengers and supply carriers, still dangerous but exposed. The Americans expected destroyer escorts to be useful, not legendary. Escorts were workhorses, not headline ships. What followed reads like an audit of vulnerability. After I-16, intelligence revealed plans for a Japanese submarine patrol line north of the Admiralty Islands, a warning screen to detect American fleet movements.
But a line, once exposed, can be broken. The sinkings followed in brutal rhythm. RO 106, May 22. RO 104, May 23. RO 116, May 24. RO 108, May 26th. RO 105, May 31st. 6 submarines in 12 days. The record stands. Popular retellings sometimes scramble designations or details, but the core truth is solid and documented. The dates, the 6 submarines, the intelligence role, the Hedgehog weapon, and the results. For Japanese submariners, this week marks the collapse of sanctuary. Distance no longer protects. The ocean becomes a grid, measured, searched, decoded. For the Americans, England proves that small ships matter, that modern war rewards sensors, training, coordination, and repeatability more than spectacle. This is why England received a Presidential Unit Citation, and her commanding officer received a Navy Cross. Awards are paperwork, but they are also institutional memory. They tell future sailors what the Navy wants repeated. Return now to the Hedgehog, our symbol. Depth charges are force thrown into uncertainty. Hedgehog is precision applied to uncertainty. It is not heroic intuition. It is collective competence. Sonar operators, plotters, conning officers, gunners, each role precise, each dependent on the others. That is why the ship was never the point. The system was. After 12 days, the Pacific closes again. The bubbles vanish. The oil thins. The surface becomes beautiful, as if nothing happened. But the record remains. 6 submarines in 12 days. If freedom and ideology sound abstract, this is what they look like when they become physical. A ship built quickly, manned by citizens, trained in repeatable methods, guided by shared intelligence, and armed with weapons designed for reliability rather than spectacle. The Hedgehog's most honest feature is this: it explodes only on contact. No false triumph, no noise unless the truth is struck. And somewhere in Japanese Naval Command, officers would have stared at loss reports, trying to understand how a small ship behaved like a net, trying to understand that the ship was never the point. In the end, the Pacific War was not decided by miracles. It was decided by accumulation, production, intelligence, training, logistics. England's 12 days are a miniature of that truth. That abundance, when harnessed to organization, becomes inevitability. And that is the lesson that lingers after the last sonar ping fades. When a society can afford to learn, adapt, and rebuild, when teamwork becomes doctrine and doctrine becomes hardware, even a tiny ship can carry the weight of an empire's future.